My true story from Arizona. He pinched my mouth open and poured mouthwash in, saying, "Your breath stinks." I stayed silent until one line made him drop to the floor, crying. I stood frozen, my fingertips gently grazing the warm cup of tea, as if it could somehow hold all my strength. Mara's voice cut through the silence like shattered glass. "Your mouth," she spat, stepping forward with all the contempt she could muster, "is nothing but a cesspool of your failures." I tightened my grip on the teacup to keep from shaking. Jordan loomed behind her, towering above me, grabbing a bottle of mouthwash. He uncapped it with a sharp hiss and pressed it against my lips. Before I could react, he forced open my mouth and sprayed a torrent of that chemical bitterness straight down my throat. Cold liquid spilled over my tongue, sharp and unforgiving, burning the back of my throat. He pressed my cheek against the edge of the sink, pinning me there as if I were nothing more than trash. I tasted mint and something darker. Disgust, betrayal, humiliation. He laughed, harsh and empty. "Your mouth stinks worse than old pipes," he snarled as I swallowed back tears and bile. I stood there silent, my throat burned, my eyes watered, and yet I did not cry. I did not flinch. I only stood, my knees threatening to buckle, with memories breaking me from the inside. I remembered the trembling day I signed those papers to enter the nursing home. They told me I chose it. My hand quivered then, just as it trembles now, cradling this teacup, when Mara handed me the pen and flashed a fake, encouraging smile. They thought that moment broke me, but I recorded every insult, every venomous word they used. That's why I came back to this kitchen, not just for closure, but to preserve every hateful syllable. Pain flared when Jordan pushed me toward the sink again. Muddy water splashing my dress. Their accusations echoed, "If she dies before Tuesday, inheritance is ours." The words scratched against my ribs, an acid reminder of their greed. My heart was hammered. Each beat is a painful reminder of years I spent soothing Jordan's feverish nights, of nursing my youngest Leia back from a broken heart with lullabies and gentle hands. I watched their faces proud, cruel, triumphant, as they treated me like I had no rights, no dignity. My cheeks burned with shame and anger, but I remained silent because now silence was not submission. With trembling fingers, I reached inside my pocket and withdrew my small smartphone. Its screen was dark, not yet recording, not yet confronting the ugliness around me, but my eyes locked with theirs, cold, unblinking. I stood firm, knees quivering, voice restrained by every memory, every slight, every betrayal. Fear trembled through me, but beneath it, something stronger stirred, resolve. I held that phone as if it were a lifeline. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I only stood unbroken, ready. And in that moment, I was ready to let the world hear what they thought they buried behind closed doors. After the taste of mouthwash had long faded, its sting remained, not on my tongue, but in my bones. I waited until they both left the kitchen. My knees buckled once they were gone, but I held on to the sink edge like it was the only stable thing left in my world. Then, with a trembling but deliberate hand, I reached for my old coat, slipped outside under the porch light, and called the one person who still treated my voice as if it mattered. "Ma'am," came the lawyer's voice after the second ring. "It's time," I whispered. "Prepare the trust, make it irreversible, and start recording this number. I may need protection." That night, I could not sleep, but I could read. I dusted off the book on elder law I kept hidden in my closet, the one my late husband once teased me for hoarding. I drank hot chamomile tea, not to soothe, but to stay sharp. I flipped page after page while my back throbbed and my jaw ached, not from age, but from the grip of my son's fingers. And then I prepared. The next day, while they were out, I placed the first camera tucked into the ceramic pot of Emily's old orchid, long wilted but never discarded. It sat right at the dining table where most of their venom was spewed. The second camera I placed behind the family wedding photo. It was the one where Jordan stood in his tuxedo. Mara all smiles. I remembered framing it. Now I reframed it with purpose. Every insult, every hand that shoved, every time they laughed while I wiped mouthwash from my blouse, I would not erase the past. I would capture it. "They think I'm deaf, that I'm dumb," I said to myself, adjusting the angle of the orchid camera, my voice no louder than breath. But I see, I hear, I remember. I returned to my room, knees stiff, but step steady. Later that night, they return. Jordan complained about the thermostat being too low. Mara griped about the laundry smelling like old woman. I stood quietly washing dishes, memorizing tone, pattern, timing, everything. Their cruelty had become a rhythm, and I learned it like music. But this time, I did not flinch. This time I documented. It was not revenge. I sought. It was truth. Clear, undeniable, recorded truth. Truth that a judge, a jury, and the world could no longer ignore. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. I took notes in a small journal hidden behind the cleaning supplies. I marked every phrase that could hold weight in court. I copied down details from the old insurance fraud Mara had pulled against her own mother before that poor woman slipped and was institutionalized. I recalled the time Jordan placed his hand over mine and signed the papers I never understood. Papers that, it turned out, granted him early access to my pension. I had called it trust. The law called it coercion. It was not just emotional abuse anymore, it was theft. It was systemic humiliation. It was criminal. On the third night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror holding my phone like a microphone. Behind me on the recording, I let their words play. Old bag, you stink worse than garbage. Why not just die and save us rent? Your breath ruins dinner. The words did not break me. They armed me. I pressed record on the camera again, aimed the phone toward my reflection. I looked tired, but I also looked awake. I've stayed silent long enough, I said quietly into the lens. They thought I would forget that I would hide, that my silence was fear, but silence is strategy. Then I held up the phone like a torch. They tried to shame my voice, I whispered, but this time justice will speak for me. The cake was pink, 3 layers of artificial sweetness topped with a golden number, 70. Like that was supposed to be a celebration. The house had never looked so polished. Twinkling fairy lights curled around the banister. Fresh peas stood tall in vases, and my name, Martha, was spelled out in golden balloons above the fireplace. Mara had invited the neighbors, the ladies from the quilting circle I used to attend, even 2 church friends I had not seen in years. Everyone smiled, raised glasses, and whispered about how wonderful it was to see me up and about again. No one knew the truth except me. I entered the room, not as a guest of honor, but as a witness, with a case file in her pocket. My dress was navy blue, plain, and stiff around the collar. I wore no jewelry, no makeup, just silence and a phone in my purse. Mara greeted me first, 2 air kisses that never touched my cheek. Jordan gave me a stiff nod like I was a burden that had grown legs and walked back into his life again. The music played light jazz. Plates clinked. People passed around canapes and deviled eggs, and yet under it all, I felt the tremble in the floorboards. This party was not celebration. It was distraction, a lie dressed in frosting, and I had come to peel it off. Halfway through dinner, as the lights dimmed and someone passed champagne flutes, Jordan tapped his glass for silence. I just want to say, he began, standing tall, how grateful we are that Mom is here with us tonight, after all she's been through. It's good to have her back where she belongs. There was a soft ripple of applause. Mara wiped the corner of her eye, pretending to dab away emotion. I waited. He continued, you know, family is everything, and forgiveness is the heart of it. So, tonight is about healing and moving forward. I stood up. Every eye turned. I took a deep breath. My son is right, I said. Tonight is about truth, and I do believe in healing, but not through lies. I pulled my phone out of my purse. 1 thumb tap. The audio began to play. Loud, clear, brutal. If she dies before Tuesday, the money clears. Just help her up the stairs and pray she falls. Gasps. A woman in the back dropped her fork. Breathe through your mouth, Jordan. Her breath stinks like grief and guilt. Someone near the door whispered, oh my God. The recording continued month after month of contempt, cruelty, commands. My voice rarely appeared in those clips, but theirs filled every corner of that house, now every inch of this room. Jordan's face turned a sickening shade of ash. Mara looked ready to bolt, but stayed frozen, her smile gone, mascara beginning to smear. I let the audio run. 3 full minutes. No one moved. No one breathed. I finally pressed pause. Then slowly I lifted my chin and said the words I had rehearsed, not in front of a mirror, but inside my ribs where the hurt lived. I raised you, I told Jordan. I wiped your mouth and your tears, and I kept quiet through too much. But silence is no longer safety. It is surrender, and I am not surrendering anymore. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mara gripped the table, knuckles white. I stepped closer to the center of the room, facing the guests. For those of you who came here thinking this was a birthday party, I am sorry. This is not a celebration. This is a reckoning. I held up the phone again, this time not to play, but to show the blinking red light. I recorded everything. And I have given copies to my lawyer, my advocate, and my daughter Leia, who is flying in from Berlin. She knows everything now, and she's coming home. The crowd murmured. I turned back to Jordan and Mara. You wanted a party, I said. You got one with a gift you never expected. Justice. Just then, faint but rising, came the sound of a siren. At first, people thought it was a coincidence, but then the red lights danced across the windows. I looked at Jordan. Happy birthday to me, I said, and then I sat back down, straight, silent, victorious. As the front door creaked open, the police car pulled into the driveway with no sirens, but the silence was somehow louder. It was not chaos. It was control. 2 officers stepped out. Crisp uniforms, no small talk. One walked directly to the front door, the other stayed behind to speak with a third man in plain clothes. Detective Ramirez, I later learned. I stayed seated on the porch swing. I did not move. I only nodded when they approached and showed their badges. Mrs. Hartman? The officer said, we have a warrant for evidence collection regarding a complaint of elder abuse and fraud. I opened my front door and let them in. They went straight for the den where the router was and asked for all electronic devices. I had already gathered what they needed. 2 smartphones, 3 memory cards, and a small USB labeled mouthwash incident. They took them carefully like surgical tools. Every item was tagged and sealed. No one looked at me with pity, just professionalism. It was the most respect I had received in that house in 5 years. Within the hour, a second unit arrived. They spoke with my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who had overheard screaming the night Jordan pushed me. She gave her statement. Another officer checked my medicine cabinet, cross-referencing prescriptions against what the house had been supplied during my time home. And then the big find. Ma'am, the detective said, holding up a crisp folder. Do you recognize this? I did. It was the consent form Mara had forged, the one that said I voluntarily entered the nursing facility, but it was dated 3 days after I had been taken there. The signature, mine, was shaky, inconsistent, and the witness line signed M.H. Mara Hartman. When they asked if I could verify my medical records, I handed over the second folder, my independent checkup, signed by a doctor, confirming that I was of sound mind and body. I had prepared this moment like a soldier setting a trap. And they walked into every line of it. We'll need copies of everything, the detective said. You can keep the originals, I replied. I have backups. In the kitchen, they installed a temporary tag on the wall behind the microwave where my camera had caught footage of Jordan pinning me to the sink and forcing the Listerine into my mouth. They watched the video twice. No one spoke during the playback. The timestamp, the clarity, the intent. This alone is enough for felony charges. One officer whispered to another. Outside, a third car had already driven to the school where Jordan worked. He had been suspended pending investigation. The district would not tolerate abuse, especially not on public record. And Mara, she made the mistake of going to the hospital that day trying to update my medical file to accelerate her power of attorney privileges. She was caught at the front desk with a forged document in hand. She was arrested on sight. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to curse. Justice was unfolding exactly how I had planned it. The next morning, my lawyer arrived with a folder in hand. He looked pleased. We've reviewed the trust, he said. It's ironclad, filed under Arizona revised statutes, witnessed by 2 unrelated parties, and authenticated prior to any medical concerns. They cannot touch a single dollar. I poured us tea. They will try, I said. They already did, he replied. And they lost. He pulled out the final papers. Do you wish to proceed with pressing criminal charges? I did not hesitate. Yes, I said, not for revenge or recognition. That afternoon, I appeared at the station to give a formal statement. I brought Kevin, my nurse, from the facility, who testified how I had arrived crying, confused but coherent. How I had asked to go home and been denied access to a phone. How Mara had screamed at me in the hallway, even in public. We gave the timeline, we gave the truth, and I did not flinch once. By sunset, the warrants were approved. The story hit local news first. Arizona grandmother exposes abusive son and daughter-in-law using hidden cameras. A local reporter called me a quiet storm. I liked that. That evening, as I sat in the back of the squad car watching from across the street, I saw them bring Jordan out in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, spiritually, like a man who had spent too long barking orders and now had no voice left to protest. He did not look at me, But I saw him look at the porch, at the swing, at the seat I had once reserved for storytelling, laughter, lullabies, and now retribution. When the car pulled away, I took a sip from my thermos. Chamomile tea. Warm, gentle, silent, but still strong. The same could be said for me. I arrived at the courthouse just after sunrise. Reporters clustered in doorways, microphones poised like vultures, neighbors lined the steps, some with sympathy, others with thinly veiled shock. They had watched the story unfold in the news, Arizona grandmother exposing her own children for elder abuse and fraud. I felt the tremor of nerves in my chest, but my voice remained steady as I walked through the grand wooden doors. The courtroom was packed. Mara and Jordan sat at the defendant's table, their heads lowered, shoulders rigid. Neither dared look up. When the judge called the session to order, the bailiff's gavel echoed like a gunshot. The silence was electric. My lawyer handed me a stack of papers. I took them, but I barely needed them. I had memorized every word, every line. My truth needed no crutch. When it was my turn, I stood and walked to the lectern. I cleared my throat and looked directly at my children. "You wanted me dead," I began, my voice calm but firm. "Well, I lived. I lived to show you all what justice looks like." Gasps rippled through the gallery. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in into the hush, into their hearts. I stood in a hallway, mouth pried open. "You poured poison into me," I continued. "And all because I dared to speak, dared to be a woman, and dared to matter." Mara's lips quavered. Jordan's hands tightened into white knuckle fists. The judge leaned forward. "I will take your full statement into the record." So I did. I narrated my suffering, the forced move to the nursing home, the humiliations, the betrayal, the footage, the forged documents, every scar, every insult. They would hear it all. I ended with an appeal. "I ask you not for revenge, though it would be easy. I ask you for justice. Justice for all elders who suffer in silence. Justice for me who refused to disappear." At that moment, I felt more alive than I ever had. The gallery leaned in. Even strangers seemed to stand with me. Mara and Jordan shifted, unable to look me in the eyes. They whispered to their attorneys. They accepted the charges: elder abuse, financial fraud, falsifying legal documents. When they pleaded guilty, the courtroom seemed to exhale. The verdict was swift. The judge handed down sentences: community service, restitution, probation, perhaps no prison time, but public exposure for their cruelties, their careers in ruin, their reputations shredded. When the judge spoke the final words, tears welled in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief. I had witnessed my own resurrection in that room. As the gavel fell one last time, I turned to face Mara and Jordan. I lifted my chin. I did not speak again. My lawyer approached, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "You were incredible," he whispered. I nodded. "No, I was necessary." Outside, reporters swarmed again, but this time I spoke for all who had no voice. "I want this known. Elders deserve respect, dignity, justice. Age is not weakness, it is wisdom. Silence is not grace, it is suffering, and justice when spoken can heal." The cameras flashed. I stepped back, but I was not afraid because that day, at that moment, I stood for something far greater than myself. As I walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd parted. A few called, "Thank you." Others murmured prayers. I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I felt the strength of my past flow through my bones. I felt the power of truth. Later, back home, I unstacked roses from supportive neighbors and placed them in a vase by my window. The petals caught the evening light. In the silence, I thought of the woman who signed paperwork with shaking hands, forced into a nursing home. She would never see that version of herself again. I had spoken, and she had been heard. The first fundraising night for the Second Chances Foundation filled the old community hall to its cracked rafters. What once hosted bingo nights now held clipboards, microphones, and elders leaning on walkers, each with a story, each one seen. I stood at the front, fingers wrapped around the wooden podium. Behind me, a banner read, "Dignity doesn't retire." I had expected 20 guests. We counted nearly 200. There were caregivers, pastors, nurses, and folks I had never met, but who said, "I saw your story, and I'm here because of you." We shared soup and quiet strength. People dropped dollar bills into a rusted tin can marked "Donate," and the tin filled faster than the punch bowl beside it. Then through the crowd, I saw her, Leah, my youngest. She pushed through the bodies, tears streaking her face, her suitcase still trailing behind her. I barely had time to react before she threw her arms around me. "I saw the broadcast, Grandma," she sobbed. "I saw what Dad and Mara did. I should have come home sooner, but I'm here now, and I swear I will never let you be alone again." I could not speak. My throat burned, but my arms tightened around her like roots. We sat in the corner later that night, sipping chamomile tea someone had brewed in a church kitchen kettle. "They told me you were sick, that you didn't want visitors," she whispered. "They told me you were safe." I looked her in the eyes, steadied by the glow of commitment behind them. "Sometimes," I said, "you survive something just to make space for someone else's return." She nodded slowly, wiping her face. "Then we rebuild from here." That night, we went home together. For the first time in years, I set out 2 mugs, not 1. Leah stayed with me, unpacking not just her luggage, but her love. She helped organize the office where we'd handle second chances. She filed documents, answered phones, brought in volunteers from her university network. She told me, "You don't need a castle, Grandma. You built a lighthouse." I kept her words in a drawer by my bedside. In the following months, I was invited to speak at retirement forums, churches, elder rights panels. My voice, once deemed too frail, filled auditoriums. I sat on a couch across from a popular talk show host, wearing a purple scarf Leah had picked out. When the camera blinked red, I looked straight into the lens. "I used to believe silence was safety," I said. "But silence gave them power." So I spoke, and what I found wasn't justice. It was family hidden in strangers who chose to listen. The audience clapped. One woman cried. Letters poured in. "Because of you," I told my nurse. "My daughter saw your video. She came back home. You reminded me I am still someone." We built a newsletter called Grey Courage, sharing tips, survivor stories, legal advice. The website crashed twice from traffic. One morning, the mayor's office called, "Would you accept an award for community restoration?" I paused. Then I asked, "Can I bring my granddaughter?" They said, "Yes." That evening, I stood in front of a golden seal and a wall of flags holding Leah's hand. The mayor handed me a plaque, and a young boy read my name from a note card. Rose Hathaway, Protector of Dignity. Leah snapped a picture. Later, she framed it. The frame sat beside our front door, under a shelf of rose pins we gave to every donor, every visitor, every believer. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a girl named Alina, who had driven 3 hours just to meet me. "My grandma never got to fight back," she said. "But you did for all of us." I smiled, offering her tea. "Then promise me one thing." She leaned in. "When your time comes," I said, "you will not let silence win. Speak for her and for you." She nodded, eyes shining. By the end of that summer, Second Chances had a team of 10 and a waiting list of people needing help. We had lawyers on call, therapists volunteering hours, churches offering space, but most importantly, we had stories, truths that no one could bury. I kept the mouthwash bottle, not to remember the pain, but to remember the turning point. It now sat in a glass case in our office next to a small plaque. They tried to close her mouth. She opened a door. I saw their faces again at the courthouse. Not on a TV screen, not through secondhand stories, but in person. They looked nothing like the people who once stood tall in my kitchen. Mara's once perfect blowout was frizzed and flattened under a faded hoodie. Jordan wore a wrinkled button-up and a county-issued ankle monitor. Their eyes were hollow. Their hands trembled, not with rage this time, but with ruin. The community had turned. The video of them pouring mouthwash into my throat had gone viral. At first, people assumed it was a skit, some grotesque play acting. But when the affidavit from the Arizona Elder Justice Department confirmed the abuse, the outrage hit like a sandstorm. Jordan lost his job at the local high school. Conduct unbecoming of an educator, they said. Parents protested. His name was removed from the faculty page within a day. Marla was stripped of her administrative credentials at the insurance firm. An internal review revealed she'd forged elder care consent forms, not just for me, but possibly for 2 other patients. Charges stacked like chairs after a failed banquet. They were bankrupt, financially, socially, spiritually. And then came June. Mara's mother stood outside the courthouse steps, surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones. Her voice didn't waver. "I raised my daughter to care for her elders. I raised her to know the meaning of loyalty, of compassion, of decency. What she did to her mother-in-law, no. What she did to a human being was unforgivable." Mara watched from behind a tinted car window, her face streaked with mascara and disbelief. I don't have a daughter anymore, June said simply, not one I can be proud of. Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks. That moment did not need music. It was a judgment day wrapped in silence. Later at the bail hearing, I saw them again. Mara and Jordan seated side by side but light years apart. Jordan's leg bounced. Mara clutched a tissue like it could erase everything. I stood to speak. The courtroom hushed. I gave them everything, I said, not raising my voice. Meals, a roof, trust, stories before bed, my health, my time. Jordan would not meet my eyes. Mara glanced, then looked away. And when I asked for nothing in return but respect, I continued. They poured acid in my mouth and called it Listerine. The judge adjusted his glasses. I stepped closer. I ask no vengeance, I said. Just truth. Then I turned directly to them. What are you now? I asked. Not children. Not caretakers. Not family. Only shame and skin. Neither spoke. The silence was the first honest thing they gave me in years. As I walked out of that room, I did not carry pain. I left it with them. I left the weight they had tied to me and let it collapse behind courtroom doors. Outside, the sun struck the pavement with mercy. Leah waited by the steps holding a thermos of warm tea. She tucked her arm around mine. You did it, Grandma, she whispered. No, I said softly. Truth did. And truth, when finally free, has a way of burning everything false to ash. I wake up every morning with the sun sliding through the curtains, soft and sure. The house is quiet, but not lonely. There are birds outside my window, wind chimes that sing to the breeze, and a garden that blooms because someone believed it still could. I live alone now in a small white cottage at the edge of town. It has a rose garden out front that I tend to with care. Each morning I stretch gently on the back porch, my cane resting nearby as I breathe through the stiffness. Then I sip tea, pack my tote bag, and head to the senior center. 3 times a week I teach a free class, Know Your Rights. I sit at the head of a circle, a binder in my lap, my glasses pushed down the bridge of my nose. The room is filled with elders, some angry, some afraid, all of them tired of being overlooked. I tell them, silence is not surrender. Silence is a strategy. But only if it leads somewhere. And now it's time we lead ourselves. My words are printed on the wall behind me. Someone painted them after my first class. The letters are slightly uneven, but bold. On Thursdays, I volunteer at the local elder care home, the same one they tried to send me to. I serve soup. I read aloud. I fix hearing aids and broken glasses, and when someone whispers, they won't listen to me. I kneel down, look them in the eye, and say, then let's make them. Then came the day the network called. They wanted me to appear on a daytime talk show, Elder Courage, a national program highlighting seniors who fought back. I almost said no. Then I remembered how many people still sat in rooms like I had, in silence, in shame. So I went on stage under hot lights. I told my story, not as a victim, but as a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. My own children tried to wash me away, I said, tried to silence me with chemicals and cruelty. The host leaned in, but I stayed quiet, and then I spoke, and when I did, the world heard. I paused. The audience held their breath. Silence is not submission, I said, my voice steady. Silence is strategy, and justice always finds its way. There was a moment of stillness, then applause, long, loud, not just polite but real. After the show aired, letters poured in, emails, messages. One woman wrote, "Because of you, I walked out of that house. I took my mother with me." Another, "Your voice helped me find mine." We started a weekly gathering. I called it Elder Protection. Every Sunday, Leah and I unlocked the doors of the community center. We made coffee, arranged chairs, printed guides on fraud prevention, caregiver accountability, legal aid. Leah led tech workshops for seniors, how to use email, how to record conversations, how to store evidence safely. Knowledge is power, she'd say, grinning like her younger self. One day after class, I received a letter on lavender stationery, no return address. Inside, a shaky handwritten note. I saw your interview. I'm 84. My daughter hits me when she drinks. I was too scared to tell anyone, but after seeing you, I've made an appointment with social services. Thank you for giving my silence a voice. I cried reading it, not because of the pain, but because someone had found their courage in mine. That afternoon, I stood before our group at Elder Protection. My voice cracked, but did not break. We are not burdens, I said. We are not past tense. We are still writing this story, and we get to decide the ending. The room erupted in applause. Reporters came. A small documentary crew followed me for a week. They filmed me pruning my roses, laughing with Leah, lecturing about power of documentation and self-advocacy. One night at a benefit gala for Elder Justice, I stepped on stage again. I wore a deep burgundy shawl. I felt regal, not hidden. My mouth, I began smiling, was once called filthy, useless, a place where failure festered. I held the microphone tighter. But this same mouth spoke lullabies, fed dreams, and when it was time, it told the truth loud enough to break a system. The audience rose to their feet. Not one person sat. I saw tears. I saw resolve. Leah stood beside me, holding my hand. And I knew this was not just revenge. This was rebirth. As the night ended, I left them with this. Old age is not a weakness. It is a weapon sharpened by years. Silence is not surrender. It is a strategy. And justice, though late, never misses its mark. When I walked off stage, people embraced me, not out of pity, but out of recognition. That night, before bed, I stood in my garden under the stars. I ran my fingers along the petals of a rose. One I planted the day Jordan was born. It had bloomed again. So had I. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains as I rose at dawn, the familiar creak of floorboards greeting me. Today wasn't an ordinary day. It was the beginning of everything I had fought so hard to preserve. Family, hope, trust. After so many battles, I'd earned this moment. I stepped into the kitchen to find Leah already waiting, her warm coffee steaming on the table. She looked different, stronger, more composed, yet the same loving daughter I'd over a decade ago. We shared a quiet smile, one that carried years of struggle and redemption. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I nodded, placing my hand on hers. For her, for us, always. 15 years had passed since the courtroom ordeal. In that time, our lives had been rebuilt brick by brick. My advocacy foundation, Second Chances, was thriving, supporting countless elders and families like ours. But today wasn't about the foundation. It was about the future. I had a secret to share. In one hand, I held a small box wrapped in silver paper. In the other, a life-changed letter, the adoption decree for my granddaughter, Mia, the daughter of Leah and her husband, Carlos. Leah had cried tears of joy when I told her they wanted me to formally adopt Mia, making me not just grandmother, but legal guardian. I'd hesitated only a moment, out of humility, maybe age. But then I'd realized it was my greatest honor. Our first stop was the courthouse. The building looked different now, less ominous, more familiar. I held the paperwork in my trembling fingers. Leah squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I know," she said. Inside the clerk's office, we signed the decree. When the judge asked if I would take full responsibility for Mia, I looked up at him, voice steady. Yes. I knew in my bones that the next chapter of our life together was about love, not pain. All the tears I'd shed, all the fights I'd fought. It was all for this chance at rebirth. That afternoon, we drove to the garden where I had planted roses in honor of Second Chances. Mia, all 8 years old now, skipped ahead, hair tied in bright ribbons, her laughter echoing like a spring breeze. When I caught up, she threw her arms around me, and I felt the last weight of loneliness fall away. She looked up at me with such trust that my heart ached in its fullness. We sat on a bench, the roses bloomed around us, blush pink petals whispering of renewal. Mia turned to me, eyes wide. "Grandma, I heard about what happened. I heard they were mean to you." I pulled her close. "They were once, but you and I, we have each other, and that's forever." She smiled, and I realized this moment defined everything I'd ever done. This small child, born of pain, but raised in love, was the living proof that justice wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Evening approached, and we prepared dinner, Leah, Carlos, Mia, and I. Carlos helped me knead dough for her favorite cinnamon bread. We talked about tomorrow, about school projects and bedtime stories. It was a scene ordinary families would take for granted, but for us it was miraculous. After supper, I sat in my favorite chair by the fireplace. The house was quiet now, everyone asleep. I opened the silver box. Inside a delicate rose pendant, silver and rose gold etched with a single inscription, Second Chances. I pressed it over my heart, feeling its gentle weight. Tomorrow I would wear it to the community center. Tomorrow I would continue teaching rights and offering support. Tomorrow I would speak again on radio and television, reminding the world that age does not diminish value. But tonight was for gratitude. I closed my eyes, picturing every step: the heated confrontation with Mara and Jordan, the sting of mouthwash and betrayal, the courtroom where I reclaimed my voice, the tearful embrace with Leah, the moment we stood before the judge. None of that pain could have brought me here to this warmth, this afternoon of laughter and bread. In the stillness, I whispered a prayer of thanks for justice, for love, for the courage that had refused to stay silent. A soft knock came. It was Mia holding a drawing she'd made. A grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter under a golden sun, hand in hand. The words beneath read, "Our new dawn." I hugged her tight. "Yes, sweetheart," I murmured, voice thick. "Our new dawn." As I turned off the light and walked down the hall, I paused at the photo wall, the courtroom snapshots, the talk show stills, the letters of thanks from strangers whose lives I'd touched, and there among them was the latest photo. Me kneeling beside Mia in the rose garden, both of us beaming. Behind me, the faint chime of the door closing as Leah secured the night. I knew sleep wouldn't come easily, but it would come with peace. At 95, I had learned that life doesn't give do-overs. It gives departures. Departures from pain, from cruelty, from fear. Mine had led me here to a loving family, a vindicated spirit, and a future I had the privilege to help shape. I kissed the night air goodbye and whispered, "Thank you." Because every dawn, the roses remind me, can bloom anew if we have the courage to endure. If this story moved you, if you saw even a piece of yourself in that quiet woman with the thorny past and the blooming future, then you know what I know. Silence does not mean surrender. And justice, oh, it has a way of arriving when no one's looking. This was not just a tale of survival, it was a testimony. So if you believe in truth that doesn't shout, in strength that never ages, in grandmothers who fight back with memory and mercy, then stay a while. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because revenge has no expiration date, because wisdom does not need to raise its voice, and because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens.